Hello explorers and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to answer a question from Debashish Satapathy. That's how I pronounce it. Google Translate said it should be pronounced Debashish Satapathy. I'm not really sure how you pronounce this name. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm sorry for that. The question is, hi. Thank you. The first question he asked me was, or she asked me if I have any videos that explain how to implement more controllers, and I gave a video for that because I have one ready. And the second one was, thank you, Daniel. Do you have any more videos on Node.js with MySQL? And I realized that I didn't have any explicit video how to use Node.js, Swagger, and MySQL. So I'm gonna create one. First off, to make this happen, you need to download MariaDB or MySQL, so you actually have the database server locally on your machine. Next up, you need to create a database table in this database. I called it nodes. Then I create this table nodes ID int. It's not null, auto increment, text. So I have a text with the type text, and the primary key is ID. And this is so we can actually create new nodes, and I don't need to worry about actually creating the ID, so the database will handle that for me. And then I need to update my server code and profit. I missed one little step here. I also need to run npm install MySQL, so I get the MySQL drivers for Node, but that's pretty much it. So if we go into our client application here, I just wanted to highlight that if you add a new node, I have added here so it actually sends an empty text into the backend, and this is because MySQL, if you don't set anything to your text field, it will be null. And perhaps you could modify the database and say that you the value should be not null default and then the empty string, but I didn't put that in the database. I put it in this add node function. You do as you like. Probably when you are actually writing your code in production, you will not do pretty much anything of what I do here. This is just an example to show how to work with Node.js, MySQL in this Swagger context that we have looked before. So this is how I changed this up, and I also update the nodes after I pushed a new node. So let's go into the backend server code then. First off, you need to require MySQL. So MySQL require MySQL, so you use this new node package. These two I don't use anymore. This is from the old implementation with LowDB, so maybe I should comment those out as well. And then I have created a little function here for convenience. This will create a new connection for MySQL, and in this case I create the connection on the MySQL object. I set the host to localhost. I also could set the port to 3306, which is the MySQL port. Then I set the user and the password. In my case, I installed MariaDB with root and the root password very securely root. And as you saw earlier, I created a database called nodes. So these are the parameters that are required to actually connect to my database. And then I just run this connect function and return the connection. And I created this function because every one of my endpoints will create a MySQL connection, so I didn't want to write this code many times. And many of them will also get the notes from the database. So I need a function to actually fetch notes from the database. So this get notes will get the result object, so I can actually send the result back from what I actually fetched. I have this connection that I will use in this function, and I also give it an SQL statement. And the query is pretty easy. You query with the SQL statement. You have a callback function that takes an error, some results, and get some fields as well. Fields are never used. If I have an error, then I will throw that error out. If not, I will map my result. And if you don't know how to map things, how filter works, and so on, I have a video explaining how these concepts works in detail using Java, but they are pretty similar in JavaScript as well. The big difference between JavaScript and Java when it comes to map and filter and so on is that Java is a typed language and JavaScript is a non-typed language. So some of the things are easier to write in JavaScript because you don't have to remember which type you are using and so on. And this result map here, I actually map over the results and I get a result variable here. And what I return in this lambda is the ID, and I will set a string before the ID and append it to a string, and that's just so I get a string value back with my ID, because in my Swagger definition I have said that the node should be an ID plus a text, and both of them should be string. So if I returned an int here, I would get a validation error in my Swagger implementation. So I need to convert this ID, which is an integer, to a string. And then I stringify these and return this as an end result to the browser. And I also end the connection, so I don't have that open. So let's look at the first function here. We get all the nodes. That's one of the endpoints. And it sets the header and the response code. These are the old implementation as well. And this is the old code I used to get all the nodes from this LowDB. And the difference here is that I create a connection, I get all nodes, and I run this select star, so all the fields from nodes. So I get all the nodes from the database. And as I implemented here, it will give those back on the actual result back to the web browser. This UID is something that I also don't use anymore, so that's from the old implementation. So post note, create a new note. These are the old implementation. This is the actual pushing of a new note to the LowDB. So that's the old code that I replace. And in this case, I create a connection. I create a statement for my SQL. So in this case, I insert into nodes the value text, and the actual values that I will insert, I denote with the little question mark here. And then I create an array with all the values that I want to use in my SQL statement. And in this case, it's just text that I get from the sent value. And it's the same as you have up here. And then I run a query on my connection with the MySQL format function. And this format function will take my SQL string and append the inserts on these question marks in a manner that I get secure values in. So it will format data and remove harmful code. So this is a way to prepare your SQL statements so you don't inject harmful code into your database or get some errors there. So that's this implementation to insert a new note. Then we have the endpoint where we get a note by ID. I'm not really sure if I'm using this, but in this case I'm looking if I actually have an ID. Otherwise I will return 500, ID required. I set the return code as usual, and then here we have the old implementation to get one value. The new implementation is as before. We create a connection, we do a select statement, get all the columns from notes where ID is a specific ID. The inserts are the ID value, and then I do a format into my notes function here, so I will return the notes with that ID, so that will probably only be one note, and but I can reuse my function here, which is nice. Put, so I will replace a note in the database, and the old implementation we have here, where you find something, assign a new value, and get the value back. In my implementation, I create a connection as usual. I create an update statement where I set text to this question mark, where an ID is another question mark. My insert values are text and ID. I format them and do a query. So this code here will do the actual update to the database, and after that I will fetch all my notes so I get those back to the web browser so it can display the updates. And the patch is pretty much the same. Usually you have a difference between put and patch, because in a patch scenario you can update one value, but in the put scenario you update all values. But because I only have one value in my database, this text value, and one ID column, then I can have the same implementation for both of those. And lastly we have delete notes, and this is the old implementation where we just remove something depending on a specific ID. The new implementation is create a new connection, set up an SQL statement, delete from notes where ID is this little question mark, and my inserts are the actual ID value. I format them and put them into this query, and then I just end the connection. Because I don't want to return anything back, I just want to return the status code 204 was deleted. So that's the only thing I need to return. And by that I can go back to this client, add a new note, hello explorers, it's updated. And if I reload my web browser, it's still there. I remove it, and it's still removed. So now I'm using a database called MariaDB. The difference between MySQL and MariaDB is pretty much that MySQL is something with a larger company behind it, and with more support behind it perhaps, and MariaDB is a database built by the creator of MySQL, and I feel it's a little bit nicer, it's a little bit more open, and it has very nice tooling to it. So if you want a different DB engine than MySQL, and you still want the same, roughly the same functionality, try MariaDB out. I really like it. I hope this answered your question, and I hope you found this interesting, and I really hope that you learned something today. If you have any questions about this, hit me up in the comment section, and I really hope to see you in the next one.